You know, it'd be really awesome if I just sat down one time, watched a popular movie that everyone liked, and was like, good movie. Good, good movie. And you know, I wanted it to happen here. I wanted to like the Suicide Squad so badly because I wanted to like this film years ago when it was announced. It's James Gunn. I wanted to like it when I heard the reviews were good. I wanted to like it because I want to see a good movie. I want to like it because I think it would be a nice underdog story that after Suicide Squad 2016, this one was good. I wanted to have a piece of DC content on this freaking channel that makes it seem as though that I don't have an agenda against DC, which I do not. And yet I must concede that besides A24 horror films, I think DC produces my least favorite subsect of movies that are being made right now. There's not a single one that leaves me satisfied in any way, and unfortunately, the Suicide Squad is falling into that category. We've been on this rodeo before. If you follow this channel, I know the drill, you know the drill, so we're going to try and make this short and sweet as much as we can. The Suicide Squad fails for really three separate things that it's trying to accomplish, each of which it fails to do. It fails to be a competent action comedy, it fails to be a competent legacy film that is being a legacy to the films of James Gunn, to the original Suicide Squad, to superhero movies in general, and it fails to be a competent film that tackles American politics. That's a whole wildfire right there. Why it feels the need to address any of these things in the Suicide Squad, I don't know. As an action comedy, it fails for two different things. So the main conceit of the Suicide Squad is that it's a fun, zany, gory, goofy movie. We've all heard these words. They're at the top of all the tomato meter reviews. And yet, it's none of those things because it fails to be funny and fun and it fails to be a good action movie. When it comes to the funny and fun parts, a belabored point of film criticism that I'm going to use anyway because it's accurate here is this idea of balance between drama and comedy. For some reason, there feels to be such a need to have character and depth and empathy in all these comedy films right now. But across all of history, I find is that a lot of the most effective and funny comedy movies, the ones that are taken the most seriously, are the ones that don't take themselves seriously because they understand that the point of comedy is to make people laugh. And so when you have stuff like Monty Python and The Holy Grail and What Hot American Summer, which don't have super deep characters yet are hailed as some of the greatest comedies of all time, you understand the approach where they just don't talk about character and they just make funny movies. And that unfortunately is not the case here with the Suicide Squad. You have a whole character reveal her backstory on a bus, a superhero origin backstory, as though we haven't heard that enough right now. We have King Shark with his problems with friends for some reason. We have, Idris Elba's character and him doing this for his daughter, which I'm pretty sure is the same exact thing that happened with Will Smith in Suicide Squad, but everyone just ignored that. We got Harley Quinn's problem with men. This film has such little confidence to build upon the tone it wants to exude. It tends to be a dazed and confused in the superhero genre, and yet it looks to build the most arbitrary, generic character problems for each of its cast members in order to just get brownie points, I suppose, in order to fit in with everyone else, when it ultimately would accomplish its goal more and be a much more competent movie if it just played everything for laughs. And yet at the same time, I must say that the criticism that's more to the point is that this film is not funny, which is a huge problem. You see, this is not a popular piece of film criticism because you can't make it sound elegant. I can't add any fancy adjectives to make it seem as though that I know what I'm talking about. But this film is poorly written. And I can only address that in a way that I was in the movies. You have people chuckling for the majority of the runtime. Like with Pixar films, they're so effectively spaced out, the jokes that being, that people are laughing for almost the entirety of the film, and yet that is not the case here. And I think a large part of that is that so many of these jokes feel as though they're in some way refashioned from jokes you've heard in other movies or in real life. Nothing really felt truly original here. And I think the ultimate summation of that is that Harley Quinn makes a joke out of just 69. She says 69 and that's the joke. And no one is laughing except one woman in the back, and we're all looking at her like, what are you laughing at? And so yeah, John Cena has some funny moments. He has some good dramatic moments along with Rita Ora. And yet both of them just are not able, of course they're not able to salvage an entire movie's worth of failed jokes and poorly constructed dramatic beats. But both of them are very good, and I wish they get praise. When it comes to the action part of this film could have been salvaged a lot if it had competent action scenes. The problem is, though, is that James Gunn is maybe the most ill-equipped person to ever direct action on the face of this planet Earth. I flat out hate the way he directs action. That's a powerful word, and yet I totally mean it here. Because yes, Michael Bay and Paul Greengrass popularized horrible techniques for shooting action, but at least they shot action scenes. James Gunn doesn't shoot action scenes. He shoots ideas that he disguises with fists and kicks and punches and feet and guns and bullets. He disguises ideas with all those things to make them seem as though they're fight scenes, but they are just simply are not. It's like when Yondu was doing his whistle thing in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. There's no ebb and flow to that scene. There's pop music on in the background, bodies are falling, he's whistling, and that's it. There's no breath or structure or momentum or build. There's nothing about what makes an action scene good there. It's just an idea that he has, and he runs wild with it, like he did at the beginning of that film with the fake one-shot. He does it here again and will totally sacrifice intelligent action scenes for one single idea. Like when Idris Elba and John Cena are going through the camp, instead of utilizing all the characters and all their different powers, even though Ratcatcher 2 and Polka Dot Man can be super cool, let's not do that. Let's make a bunch of jokes out of this entire camp, which could be a beefy action scene. But why do that when you have one stupid idea, like fighting part of a fight scene in the reflection of Peacemaker's helmet? Why try and shoot something in a way that makes sense when you can just have something be arbitrarily shot in the reflection for 15 seconds? James Gunn just attempts to be so showy, and this is even independent of the action stuff, but when it comes to the words and, saying that the Suicide Squad is versing sorrow and saying that it's 8 minutes later and putting all these things that are just unnecessary into the environment and using CGI to do that, it is all awful. I said this to my friend in the theater. It is as though this film is the one decision in Inglourious Bastards where Tarantino decided to put Sam Jackson as narration. It's like if that one decision was this whole film. It's so unnecessary in the way that it composes itself and it uses its style, whether that be the animation going behind Harley Quinn or it be the ridiculous lighting techniques used for the one scene where they're walking together in the rain, which makes no sense considering the lighting of the actual scene. It gives me a headache watching how much James Gunn prioritizes style and substance. And going back to the action forefront, these sins are not even the worst ones he commits in this movie. The worst one is just the ending action sequence, which is just independent of his own directorial problems, and it's just a problem in this film. You build up this final encounter with Starro so much, you have so many mini fight scenes before that, and yet when it actually gets to him, when it actually gets to that happening, you have each hero do one thing, and then the conflict resolves. Deus Ex Machina, and you wrap it up. Why? Why would you not allow us to finally see these powers at work? Why would you just allow every character to do one thing, most of which aren't even that clever in the first place, and end it? It's as though he uses action as though he's playing with action figures. He's like a child that gets bored super quickly. He does one thing, he makes one joke out of it, uses one maneuver, and then goes on to the next. And then he forgets about it and moves on and makes up the story in his head. And I hate it. I hate the way he composes every fight in this. And then you could talk about the gore and talking about that in relation to the action, but I think it's more useful to talk about that in relation to legacy. Because Suicide Squad tries so hard, and, trying hard, showy. These are things that really could be used to describe this film because they're all valid and totally meaningful here. He tries so hard to play with the idea that this film shouldn't be R-rated, right? That this was like a big breakthrough moment for the genre, even though that we've had R-rated movies for like 5 years now in the genre, at least since Deadpool. And you look at it, and he fails to utilize the violence and the curse words in an effective way. Like when someone dies in Logan, someone really fucking dies. Like when you see someone get their head chopped off, they use it effectively. When they use the F word, they use it effectively. It has meaning to it. And when someone dies in Deadpool even, there's a certain slapstick to it. There's a certain humor to it that wouldn't come if you couldn't use blood and gore in PG-13 movies, which is why that movie is rated R. And yet here, you don't feel that. I feel as though the action is very doctored with. For some reason, the hits feel spongy. There's no satisfying end to them. There's no satisfying crunch. I don't like the sound design. It is, of course, very generic because why put any sound design effort into a big-budget movie? And when it comes to the F word and the language of the film, it tries so hard to be edgy. And, of course, in trying hard to be edgy, it comes off is very childish, and I wish it wouldn't do that. And speaking of stuff it likes to play with, it also likes to play with the notion of it being a sequel to 2016 Suicide Squad, and that was such a bad movie. And it tries to do this by making fun of Suicide Squad at the very beginning of the movie, but in order to do that, it has to set up exposition with a whole new team, and so you essentially spend 20 minutes making fun of that movie, but also having to deal with a bucket load of exposition in this one. And then no one's happy because then you have 20 minutes where the film fails to get into the actual conflict of going to the island. So great job, James Gunn. Once again, outdid yourself. And hey, James Gunn and playing with his legacy, that's next on the chopping block because the musical cues in this are really bad. And they feel so unnatural and improper, where the ones in Guardians of the Galaxy felt so right. They felt so right for that world, and it's because Peter Quill and music was a large part of his life, and because music is just randomly laid on top of the stuff in these scenes, it just feels unnatural and unnecessary. So many moments in this could have been taken seriously and played straight, and yet they're not, because of the fact they can just be used for a gag with music. And I don't like that at all, of course, especially when it's at the final moment of your film when the heroes are literally triumphing over the bad guy and we have music that doesn't match the tone. What is the point of the irony in that? Nothing. We're just there to be a James Gunn movie. So much of the film just feels pointless, and when there is a point to be made, it's horribly mishandled, as is the case with the American politics in this film, because now we're getting to this. The thing is, Armond White, who I usually don't defer to on stuff like this, makes interesting points on films that are trying to be gratuitous fun and also have a very specific agenda to them. And for me, there's a very odd dissonance created when they're trying to be both popcorn flick and also have something very specific to say about the current state of American politics. Both Rian Johnson's latest features, The Last Jedi and Knives Out, failed, in my opinion, to strike a meaningful balance where you're trying to enjoy the film on its own merits, its own blockbuster entertainment merits, and trying to look into the deeper political meanings in them. For some reason, those viewings just never feel correct. They always feel uncomfortable to some regard. And for me, the whole point of the Suicide Squad is to be a joyous, carefree event, not for the whole family, but for people 18 and up. And I think Deadpool does that very well because, doesn't try to make any talks about American imperialism. And this film does. I think it sabotages, again, its own tone. And when it comes to the actual commentary, well, it's trying to take so many jabs that it fails to land a forceful blow. It's talking about American jingoism, imperialism. It's talking about hypocrisy. It's talking about conspiracy and cover-ups. And it's talking about all these phrases. And it's talking about the police, too. I forgot about that with Ratcatcher, too. It's talking about everything. And because it's talking about everything, similar to Jim Jarmusch's The Dead Don't Die, it doesn't feel like it's talking about anything at all. Much of the language and the rhetoric behind it feels so generic because none of it is focused on one particular issue, which is, of course, a major problem because then it comes off as a didactic and condescending Hollywood takedown of basic American principles, which is what you want least in these films. What you want is something that feels honest and earnest and something that feels correct, that you can sympathize with, that you can say, I can see where that's coming from. And that's exactly what Captain America the Winter Soldier was. It was about government surveillance. It focused on one thing, and it played that thing very straight. It was very honest about what it was trying to do, and because it took itself so seriously, was able to have the reputation of a 70s spy thriller made in the 21st century, because it took itself seriously and it wasn't tonally fighting against itself, which this film clearly is. And so the answer to why this film and that film are completely different in quality, it's everything. It doesn't feel right to say why this film doesn't work in comparison to another, because it doesn't work because it doesn't work on its own. It doesn't work because this vision of this movie is just not what it is. This is not a fun action comedy. This is not a comprehensive political film. It is not a film that correctly plays and subverts with all these expectations about being a James Gunn movie and the DCU. It doesn't work. And for me, I did enjoy Rita Ora and John Smith. I would have loved to see more of them. Maybe I'll watch part of the Peacemaker show, but I fear that it will have a lot of the same issues as this. But for me, it was just something that wasn't offensively bad, but also failed to live up to even mediocre quality, that failed to really elevate itself above that original Suicide Squad movie and make it an imprint on the genre itself. It ended up being another bad DC movie, rife with problems that I personally think are worth pointing out. Possibly, I may actually be in a minority and just be completely outnumbered here. I think a lot of people found out that they didn't like Justice League and just found themselves completely outnumbered by the people that did. But I may be totally wrong because the reaction so far has been overwhelmingly positive. But for me, The Suicide Squad was a film that did not work, that I do not want to watch again, and now I'm going to bed. Have a good night, everyone.